The quiet town of Brooksville was a place where everyone knew each other's business, where secrets were scarce and trust was given freely. But beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful community, a dark tale was unfolding in the grand Harrison estate, a story so twisted that it would leave the town reeling in horror. David Harrison, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for ruthlessness, had moved to Brooksville several years ago with his first wife, Eleanor, and their young son, Jonathan. David was not a man who inspired warmth or affection. He was cold, calculating, and driven by his desire for success. His marriage to Eleanor had been a loveless one, a union built more on convenience than on genuine connection. Eleanor, a quiet woman with a gentle spirit, had suffered in silence, her health deteriorating over the years as David became more and more distant. The town of Brooksville had always whispered about the Harrison family. Eleanor was seen as the delicate flower wilting under the harsh gaze of her husband. She was often seen walking alone in the expansive gardens surrounding the estate, her face a mask of quiet despair. The few friends she had noted how she seemed to grow more fragile with each passing year, her once vibrant spirit dimming until it was just a flicker of its former self. When Eleanor died under mysterious circumstances, the town was shaken. Her death was ruled as an accident. She had supposedly fallen down the stairs late at night, but whispers circulated that there was more to the story. Some believed that David had played a role in her death, that their marriage had become so strained that he had wanted her out of the way. Others speculated that Eleanor had taken her own life, driven to despair by her loveless marriage and the oppressive atmosphere of the Harrison estate. But no one dared to confront David directly. His wealth and influence in the town made him untouchable. Jonathan, only 8 years old at the time, was devastated by his mother's death. He had been close to Eleanor, who had doted on him as her only child, and her loss left a gaping hole in his life. David, however, showed little outward emotion. Within a year, he had remarried, this time to Evelyn, a woman nearly 20 years his junior. Evelyn was everything that Eleanor had not been, beautiful, vivacious, and ambitious. But she was also manipulative, and she quickly took control of the household. From the moment Evelyn moved into the Harrison estate, Jonathan sensed that something was wrong. He was still grieving the loss of his mother, and Evelyn's presence felt like an intrusion. She made no effort to bond with him, treating him as more of a nuisance than a son. Jonathan, in turn, resented Evelyn, seeing her as a usurper who had taken his mother's place in the family. The tension between them grew as Jonathan entered adolescence, his grief morphing into anger and rebellion. Evelyn was a master of subtlety. She never raised her voice or openly showed her disdain for Jonathan, but her actions spoke volumes. She would rearrange the house, removing the few remaining traces of Eleanor, replacing family photos with new ones that excluded Jonathan. She redecorated rooms, erasing any sign of the life Eleanor had tried to build. She even began to refer to herself as Jonathan's mother, a title that infuriated him and deepened the rift between them. Evelyn, for her part, viewed Jonathan as a threat. She knew that if anything happened to David, Jonathan would inherit the Harrison fortune, leaving her with nothing. She began to manipulate David, subtly planting doubts in his mind about Jonathan's behavior. She would tell him that Jonathan was becoming unmanageable, that he was prone to violent outbursts, that he was a danger to himself and others. David, absorbed in his business dealings, dismissed her concerns, believing that Jonathan's behavior was just typical teenage rebellion. But Evelyn was not content to let things lie. She began to devise a plan that would remove Jonathan from the equation entirely and secure her position as the sole heir to the Harrison fortune. She knew that David had a will that left everything to Jonathan, but she also knew that wills could be changed. All she needed was an excuse, a reason to convince David that Jonathan was dangerous, that he needed to be sent away. Evelyn's plan was as cunning as it was cruel. She began to provoke Jonathan, pushing him to the brink of violence with her taunts and accusations. She would accuse him of things he hadn't done, goading him into angry outbursts, and then play the victim when David intervened. She started to isolate Jonathan, turning David against him, convincing him that Jonathan was unstable, that he needed professional help. Jonathan, meanwhile, was spiraling deeper into darkness. He had always been a loner, but now he began to isolate himself even more, spending hours alone in his room, brooding over his mother's death and his growing hatred for Evelyn. He started to have disturbing thoughts, fantasies of violence that he couldn't control. He began to believe that Evelyn was right, that he was going insane, that he was becoming the monster she had painted him as. One night, Jonathan was in his room, staring at the portrait of his mother that he had hidden away after Evelyn had tried to discard it. He whispered to the image, apologizing for not being able to protect her, for not being strong enough to fight Evelyn. Tears streamed down his face as he clenched his fists, vowing that he would not let Evelyn win. He would find a way to make things right, even if it meant confronting the darkness within himself. Then one night, everything came to a head. Evelyn had been pushing Jonathan harder than ever, taunting him with cruel words, accusing him of things he hadn't done. Jonathan snapped. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and confronted Evelyn in the living room, his hands shaking with rage. But instead of fear, Evelyn's face lit up with a twisted smile. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. "Go ahead, Jonathan," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Show your father who you really are. Show him the monster you've become." Before Jonathan could react, Evelyn screamed, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house. David came running down the stairs, finding Jonathan standing over Evelyn, the knife in his hand, her face twisted in mock terror. Evelyn played her part perfectly, sobbing and pleading with David to save her from Jonathan. David, in a panic, grabbed the phone to call the police, but Evelyn stopped him. She had a better idea. They would send Jonathan away, she said, to a place where he could get the help he needed, a place where he would be out of their lives for good. David, still in shock, agreed, not fully understanding what Evelyn had in mind. The next morning, Jonathan was taken to a private psychiatric facility, a place that Evelyn had arranged for in advance. She told the doctors that Jonathan was violent, that he had attacked her, that he was a danger to everyone around him. The doctors, believing Evelyn's story, admitted Jonathan and began treating him with heavy doses of medication, drugs that dulled his senses and clouded his mind. Jonathan's days in the facility were a blur of medications and therapy sessions. The drugs they gave him made it hard to think, to focus. He felt like he was trapped in a fog, disconnected from reality. The doctors would ask him questions about his mother, about Evelyn, about the night he confronted her, but his answers were always the same, vague, uncertain. He couldn't trust his own memories anymore, couldn't tell what was real and what was a product of his broken mind. Evelyn visited occasionally, but only to reinforce the narrative that she had created, that Jonathan was a monster, that he was beyond saving. She would sit by his bedside, her voice soft and soothing, as she told him how she and David were moving on without him, how they were happy now that he was no longer there to cause trouble. She would remind him of the things he had done, the people he had hurt, the darkness inside him that could never be cured. But Jonathan was not beyond saving. Slowly, his mind began to clear, and he started to piece together what had happened. He realized that he had been manipulated, that Evelyn had set him up, that she had used his grief and anger against him. And as his clarity returned, so too did his determination. He would not let Evelyn win. He would find a way out. Jonathan began to play along with the doctors, pretending to be compliant, pretending to be cured. He told them what they wanted to hear, acted the way they expected him to act, all the while plotting his escape. He memorized the facility's layout, noting the times when security was lax, the guards' routines, the shifts in staff. And finally, after months of careful planning, he saw his chance. One night, Jonathan overpowered a nurse who had come to check on him, taking her keys and slipping out of his room. He moved silently through the facility, avoiding the guards and security cameras until he reached the exit. Once outside, he made his way to a nearby town where he contacted a lawyer who had been a friend of his mother's. The lawyer, skeptical at first, agreed to meet with Jonathan and hear his story. As Jonathan laid out everything that had happened, the lawyer's skepticism turned to disbelief, and then to horror. He agreed to help Jonathan, and together they began to build a case against Evelyn. Meanwhile, Evelyn had been enjoying her victory, believing that Jonathan was safely out of the way and that she had finally secured her place at the top of the Harrison empire. She redecorated the house once more, throwing out any remnants of Eleanor's presence, asserting her dominance over the estate. She hosted lavish parties, relishing her role as the lady of the manor, all the while confident that Jonathan was locked away, no longer a threat. But her triumph was short-lived. Jonathan and the lawyer gathered evidence, phone records, witness statements, documents that Evelyn had forged, and they took their case to the authorities. They spoke to former employees of the estate, people who had seen Evelyn's cruelty firsthand, who had witnessed the way she manipulated David and isolated Jonathan. The more they uncovered, the more damning the evidence became. The police, initially reluctant to reopen the investigation, were eventually convinced by the overwhelming evidence that Jonathan and the lawyer had presented. They obtained a warrant to search the Harrison estate, and what they found was even more damning than they had expected. Hidden in a locked drawer in Evelyn's office were documents detailing her plans to have Jonathan declared legally incompetent, to have him committed permanently so that she could take control of the Harrison fortune. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. In a hidden compartment behind a false wall in the basement, the police found the remains of Eleanor Harrison, Jonathan's mother. It became clear that Evelyn had not only manipulated Jonathan, but had also murdered his mother to clear her path to the Harrison wealth. The case against Evelyn was ironclad. She was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. The trial was a media sensation, with every sordid detail of Evelyn's crimes laid bare for the world to see. Jonathan, now fully recovered and determined to see justice done, testified against her, revealing the full extent of her manipulation and cruelty. During the trial, Evelyn maintained her innocence, playing the role of the wronged widow, the caring stepmother who had only tried to help a troubled boy. But the evidence was undeniable. The jury took less than a day to return a guilty verdict. Evelyn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her dreams of wealth and power shattered. Jonathan, though scarred by the ordeal, was finally free of Evelyn's influence. He inherited his father's estate, but more importantly, he inherited the truth about his mother's death, the truth about Evelyn's deception, and the truth about his own strength. Brooksville, once a town of peace and quiet, would never forget the Harrison family or the dark secrets that had been uncovered. The Harrison estate, now abandoned, stood as a grim reminder of the horrors that had taken place within its walls, a place where no one dared to venture. And Jonathan, though haunted by the past, resolved to build a new life, one free of the shadows that had once consumed him. He knew that he could never erase the memories of what had happened, but he could choose to move forward, to live not as a victim, but as a survivor. Over the years, the Harrison estate fell into disrepair, becoming a symbol of the town's darkest chapter. Some said it was haunted by the ghosts of those who had suffered within its walls. Others claimed to hear screams and whispers late at night. But no one dared to go near, and the house slowly crumbled, a monument to the evil that had once thrived there. Jonathan, now a grown man, visited the estate one last time before leaving Brooksville for good. Standing outside the decaying mansion, he felt a strange sense of closure. The house had been the site of so much pain, so much loss, but it no longer held any power over him. He walked away without looking back, determined to leave the past behind and forge a new future. But even as he started his new life, the memories lingered. He could never fully escape the shadow of the Harrison estate, the dark legacy of his family. But he knew that he had survived, that he had fought back against the darkness and won. And that, he told himself, was enough. Brooksville moved on, but the story of the Harrison family remained, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale. It was a story of greed, manipulation, and the dangers of unchecked ambition, but it was also a story of survival, of one young man's determination to fight back against the forces that sought to destroy him. And as long as the tale was told, the memory of what had happened in the Harrison estate would never be forgotten.